In this task, we are requested to take a text file that contains a mixture of integers and real numbers and separate that text file into two separate data structures. Python doesn't offer arrays as an option, so in this case we'll go with using lists. This will bring about a degree of convenience because we will be able to simply expand the list, extend it by appending additional items to it as and when we need to, rather than having to fuss and worry about the exact length that it needs to be ahead of time. So this is the text file that I'm going to use. It's called GCSE 012.txt, and you can see here that there's a mixture of integers and real numbers throughout. Many of them contain negative signs. The signs of the numbers do not really matter. It's only relevant whether they are real numbers or not. In order to generate that list of numbers, the strategy used was to go to Microsoft Excel. I'll flash the formulas on here. To generate a random integer in the range -10 to 10, rand between was used, and then to generate a random real number, just almost like a probability value between 0 and 1, the rand function was used. It doesn't need any parameters. In order to give some variety, I added the numbers together in some cases, and then at the last minute I chose some cells at random and I just set them equal to the original integer value so that we had a mixture of integers and real numbers, and then I just took that list of values and copied and pasted it into Notepad to generate the plain text file. So another dimension of this task is that we're being asked to use global arrays or global lists. Now, these global lists are quite easy to set up because in this program we're only going to be working within the main body of the program anyway, and we could create a function and then you would probably see the global lists a bit more, but it may be an unnecessary step to do that. It could be a modification that could be made later as well. So let's say that we have two lists, and let's call one of them ints, and we'll set it equal to be an empty list, and we'll call one of them doubles, and we'll set that equal to an empty list. Now, the word doubles probably not a word that, we'll call it reals, probably a better word for Python programmers. Maybe don't use the word double so much. So let's go ahead with the sort of main work of the program. So let's begin by reading in from the text file. Now, one of the algorithms that we could use here is step 1, we read in all of the text from the text file. Step 2, we dismantle it into separate strings for each of the numbers that are shown on the separate lines. And then thirdly, we decide where should the numbers go. Should they be appended to the list of ints or the list of reals? However, we could, because Python offers us the opportunity to, we could just read in the numbers one line at a time, make the decision and add them, and then advance to the next one. So let's do it that way. There's different solutions here. So what we'll do is we will read in from the text file each time, and then if the number, which by the way will be a string at that point, if the number string contains a dot, then it gets appended to the reals, to the list of reals. Otherwise, it gets appended to the, otherwise it's an int. Oops, a couple of typos there. Otherwise it's an int. So in this case, the steps that we can do then are, first of all, we want to open our text file. The text file has been deliberately saved into the same folder as this Python file. So we should be able to say, let's call it text file becomes equal to, and we're going to open a file, and the name of that file is going to be GCSE 012.txt, and we are going to be opening it in read mode, and the encoding that it uses is UTF-8, and it's best to include that to prevent any nonsense from happening. So that has opened the text file, ready to read in the data. before I forget, I'm going to go down to the bottom of the program and write textfile.close to make sure that we remember to close our text file after using it. Okay, next we're going to make a decision about reading in. So it's probably best just to read one line at a time, and then we'll make our decision about what to do. So let's call it the number read, and let's go ahead and do some reading. So we're going to say text file dot, and then we're going to use the option that's read line, just to read in one line from the file. Just to check that things seem to be going okay so far, we'll just print the number read to make sure there are no bugs. And when we do that, yep, you can see there that it's outputting the number followed by the new line character, which is something we're going to have to give some thought to later on, but that's okay, I'll just comment that out. Okay, so, and it's just obviously a tester. Okay, so the next thing is that having read in the number as a string, we can now start to make a decision. If that string contains a dot, then that means that it is in fact a real number, and if it doesn't contain a dot, then it must mean that it's an integer. So let's say if the full stop character is in the number read, so we'll just take a copy of that, paste it down. What are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to put it into the list of reals. However, before we do that, we're going to have to strip off the new line character off the end of it. So let's begin by saying that after having read in the number, we always strip off the new line character. So we say the number read becomes equal to number read dot strip, and that should take off the new line character. And then if there is a dot in number read, which is obviously just the number by itself, then we should be able to say reals dot append, and then we'll be able to append the number, but having been typecast. So we'll put that in, and then if we want to typecast it, then that means that we want to convert it into a float. So put the word float around it like that. Now that means that the first number that's been read from the text file has had its new line character stripped off. We've checked if there's a full stop in it, and if there is, then it gets appended to that list. Otherwise, ints.append, and then we take the number read and we turn it into an integer and add it to that one. So the story so far is it should work for just the first item in the text file, and now we want to set this up to iterate so that it visits all of the items in the text file. So in this case, the number read is going to read in a line, but eventually it's going to read a line where it will be reading in the end of file character. A funny thing about the readLine method though is that it doesn't behave like some other languages where it returns a special symbol. It will just give back an empty string whenever nothing is there to be read. So let's take out this tester. Let's say that this initial read from the file was a priming read. So what we can do is we can then say while number read, don't need the bracket, while number read is not equal to the empty string, then we're going to go ahead and do all of this work, and at the end, let's do control and square bracket to indent, and then at the end of doing all of that work, we're then going to read in the next value by repeating that step within the loop, and eventually it will trigger. Okay, so the subsequent read is in there. Eventually it will trigger the end of the while loop by reading in the empty string. Okay, in order to check that this is working, what we'll then want to do is at the end of it, we will want to print our two lists and look for bugs. So let's take the names of our two lists, put them further down, and let's just keep it simple. We'll just say print the ints, and similarly print the reals. Save and run. Okay, so here we have a list containing only integers, and here we have a list containing only real numbers. The list does seem to end appropriately in both cases. We don't have any strange additional symbols creeping in, and generally speaking, I'm happy with that as a solution to the task. Back to the original point about global variables. These could be kept as global variables, and all of this work could all take place within a function. So what we could do is, at this point we could define a function, and it's called populate. Let's call it populate two lists. And then let's take all of the work that we've done here, and let's use control and square bracket to indent everything so that it is now defined as part of a function. However, the lists themselves are global, which means that at the end of this, these parts here can actually be dedented, and they can become part of the main body of the program. So what we need to do is, if this is the main body of the program here, then that means that we need to call the function called populate two lists. Well, it's not really a function, it's actually a procedure. Okay, so this is a procedure to populate two global lists. And then in order to check that this procedure has worked, we can then print the two global lists. If we run it this time, it should produce the same results as before, and I'm happy to say that it does. Let me just move this up, you can get a better view of it, and yep, I'm happy with that. I'll just actually move this across the screen a little because it's being cut off at the side, and just squish it in. There we go. So yeah, so the two sets of outcomes are identical, and generally that gives us a working solution that I'm happy with.